Okay, so I wanted to cover a specific concept that I've been hearing for quite some time, but also with Microsoft Ignite being around 5 months past at this point, I think it's an important subject to cover data security posture management, or widely known as what you hear as DSPM from that perspective, right? Seems to be a pretty large topic that many people are starting to come around with using in the echo chamber or ecosystem, if you will, on what their organizations are trying to achieve moving forward. And broadly, I don't think this concept is new. When we think about risk management, we should be understanding where our information already resides, because I always say most organizations that are breached at some point in time, they're not just there to take a specific database that doesn't have valuable PII, PHI, whatever the case may be. They're there to obviously use that as leverage for a ransom from that perspective. So how we protect that information, we should always be understanding what that posture looks like as of today. And then moving forward, what can we do to reduce that attack surface? Because obviously data is the new gold when we think about how it's used in AI training, but also how it can be exploited for red teams or hackers from that perspective's benefit. Now we're going to talk broadly what data security posture management is. So you've already seen here, I defined a specific parameter solution to design to continuously monitor your organization's data security policies and procedures. And this will detect any vulnerabilities or risk related to the data that you are storing. So i.e., if you have a storage account inside a public cloud infrastructure such as Azure, AWS, etc., this would, allow or alert you from the perspective there's sensitive information stored here. This is publicly accessible. You should be aware that this could be accessed from that perspective, as just a prime example. Okay. Now, when we think broadly of our security policies, it's beyond just a public cloud infrastructure, but it's also from the end user's perspective. So I try to give the right-hand side a more larger picture of what that breaks down to. We have our end user boundary, right? Our end user logs in through some type of productivity application. They access whether it's Google Workspace, M365, whatever the case may be, mostly software as a service defined boundary. Now, ideally, we've had our cloud access security broker that monitors those software as a service applications. And sometimes that can also act as a small little DLP layer with some inline policies as well. Now, it depends how mature your organization is, right? Now, we also got to think the visibility of where that information is stored. It could be stored on a local folder. It could be stored in a Salesforce, like a CRM. It could be in that specific SaaS platform or the end user's actual individual files from that perspective. Now, when we think beyond that boundary, that's going to be where else do we store our information? So we know that could be an S3 bucket, that could be a Google storage account, that could be a Snowflake warehouse, right? That could be a number of places where the information that is valuable to our organization is stored at. Now, when we go beyond that boundary, I always delineate for those who are in the Microsoft realm what that would look like. So you want to think, as Purview has expanded its approach, if you will, you have Microsoft Purview, think about that from the SaaS boundary, and then beyond that, Azure Purview, because that's going to get into your data assets, your data mapping, your unified catalog, and then overall governance, broad strokes, okay? And we got to think multi-cloud as well, not just first party from that perspective. So when we think about data security posture management in a nutshell, this should tell us where our sensitive data information is located, the last time it's been accessed, right? What protections do we have today? And that visibility should be considered as it traverses multiple areas, such as the user's files, file shares, storage accounts. So I like to think broad picture from that area, okay? And the reason I say that too is because your information is obviously valuable. But also the core components, when we think of data in that perspective, it's a very large term, depending who's on the receiving end of that from an organization's perspective, right? They might interpret that, oh, we're talking about individual memos that are confidential to the organization or intellectual property that is for a new product, right? So the reason I keep it very large in the concept is so you can understand where we're going with it. So when we think about the data discovery phase, this likely should be automated in some shape or form to speed things up from the end user, but B, to not have the manual tedious of what is sensitive, what's not. That should already be defined before we enter the data discovery phase. But even if it's not, this will at least give us some awareness of where to start actually scoping our intentions and our time that's valuable to, right? And I also put down here on the left-hand side where you'll hear the term data mapping. And it's really a core component. Okay, so now we know where that information's at, and now we're gonna map that specifically. Now, how you map that will look a little different. The way that works in Azure Purview, you essentially put a mapping to a specific asset. That asset is then either cataloged in a unified catalog, and then an end user can view a specific portions of the catalog. You can have that constrained, unconstrained, but ideally you want some type of lineage, if you will, of the data that you do have out there that's sensitive in nature. Now, then you'll also see it's going to provide us the recommendations. And I put this in simple terms so everyone can understand. This provides the now posture of what we have. We found X, here's a suggestion to improve. And to keep this short and sweet, I put together these two different modules here. DSPM for Purview, you want to think this covers what we call insider risk management, DLP, information protection and governance. So this is going to look at your existing first-party policies, and then it's going to give you recommendations based on that, right? So I always, and transparent, this is going to look essentially at what you're doing today from the first-party perspective. And then if you have third-party connectors, I'll cover what those are as well from that area. And then when we look at DSPM for AI, you'll hear this term a lot. This is going to be those third-party generative AI apps. So if your end users are using an Entra ID account, but they also use Perplexity or Claude or whatever the case may be via the browser, how are you actually monitoring that specific line of visibility? Is that through a CASB? If it's not, those are some things to be aware of. How are you, monitoring that end user from copying proprietary information from your boundary M365 in that perspective? How does that, correlate to what policies catch that inline to prevent that from being adjusted from an LLM from that area, okay? So two different areas, but I just want to cover that because I want to be transparent on what the visibility is, but also what are those delineations, and then give you the high level view up here. So when we go back, and I'll move around a little bit, let me change screens here. So when we're in our portal, you'll start seeing the changes populate with a few things. So in our Purview Microsoft, you'll see on the far left side, and I'll zoom in a little bit here. You'll see this is kind of categorized by solutions. And you'll see data security posture management with a preview, and then DSPM for AI, which is GA. So for the posture management, when we're talking strictly SaaS boundary, right, you'll see two specific areas, recommendations and reports. Now, if you go to the reports, this is going to give you an analytics report on your assets across the first party perspective, right? So this is only going to know what it scans. So this is going to show you essentially a view, okay, Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, what are my unprotected assets? I don't have the AI connectivity enabled on this demo tenant, so you won't see anything over here, but this would say sensitive interactions per AI application. So this could be Google Gemini, ChatGPT, etc. Users performing top risk related activities on unprotected sensitive assets as well. This could give you that visibility, right? Now, when I go to my recommendations, this should take a portion of that report, right? And then tell me what I can do about it, right? This is that proactive step. Now you'll see there's no recommendations to show at this point. This is a net new, but to give you a quick overview, let me go back to overview. And this should tell me more information about my data security risk recommendations. So this gives us that same view of the report. This will say, let me go to the report and show you what I'm talking about. So data risk report for unprotected sensitive assets. So now I can drill down a little bit further. Okay, so we see it has an unprotected classifier that it was found, all medical terms. And then I can look at number of unlabeled labels without protection. So obviously it doesn't have one. And maybe I'm more concerned about where it says a New Zealand social welfare number, right? Then I can drill down a little bit further. Now, ideally, it's a little convoluted right now where I'll have to move to Data Explorer, but for brevity, just to show you a high level view of that, okay? Now, when I go to DSPM for AI, you can see there's a number of activities related to how to get started from that perspective. And so to decipher through all this noise here, you need the endpoint DLP agent. You need a browser that is essentially with a browser extension of Microsoft Purview, and those devices need to be onboarded to get that visibility. So think about that. Those are some of those third-party dependencies. Now, you'll look at this data assessment, and this will scan every time you essentially come to this dashboard, if you will. And this is providing oversharing, right? Now, you can also scope this down to custom assessments. So if there's specific areas you just want scope down to a specific SharePoint site or SharePoint sites you already are aware of that have sensitive data, you can have that scoped down. And this will essentially provide you a report on an ongoing basis, if you will. Now, it shouldn't have any activity in the Activity Explorer because I don't have anything set up. And then this will show you any related policies to essentially using generative AI throughout the organization. So the enforcement mechanisms of that are going to rely on the back end of the DLP side and the insider risk management, assuming both of those are on and configured, right? Now, I can also go to reports in this area here. This will give you essentially an overview, total interactions if you're using native Microsoft Copilot or if you're using enterprise AI apps or other AI apps from that perspective. And when I also go to recommendations, this will tell me here stuff that's not started, stuff that's dismissed or completed. So I can essentially work through these recommendations. These are to kind of help the end user be aware, okay, I don't have a policy for elevated risk users from pasting or uploading sensitive info. And then I can essentially create a policy based on that. Now, again, I always say vet these out before you make changes in your environment as anything. This is a demo tenant to show you what that looks like, okay? So bringing it all back and keeping this video short, just to give a high level view, let me go back to our drawing board. DSPM brings together that visibility, or should populate the visibility of what am I doing today, but what can I apply for better posture management across the data plane from that perspective. Now, I always say you want to think big picture because data lives in many places. It's not just the individual end users, right? Or the software as a service layer. Most of the time, it might be in a relational database where your PCI DSS information is stored, right? Now, you want that typically behind a private subnet or a private link, not obviously publicly accessible. But you want to ensure that you have proactive measures around these specific sensitive areas with information related to your data, so you can also be aware if anything changes or deviates that you should be aware of from the high level view, okay? So hopefully that deciphers it. I want to keep this short and sweet. I will be making more content as the weeks progress. I know I've taken a break, but please let me know if there's any suggestions in the comments.